It happened in Svalbard in the 19th century. When the saving expedition arrived to pick up the men who were seeking for shelter there, they were all already dead, but not from the cold. What happened there? This is the story of the tragedy of Svenskhuset in Svalbard. Hello my friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Gita Lighthouse. If you are new here, welcome, subscribe. I will not dive into all of the intros that I have done in all of my other videos, so subscribe. So today's story brings us as far as to Svalbard, also known as Spitsbergen. So this place usually associates with a lot of snow, cold, ice, and the possibility that if you go there, if you really decide to go there, that you can meet a polar bear over there. And even now, when we have all of the technologies and science, it is a really harsh environment to survive. And imagine how it was back in those times when there was no electricity and men went there to do their science, their expeditions, and even seal hunting, which will be the case of today's story. Now, if you by some kind of chance don't know what Svalbard is, do Google it because it's really interesting to know. But in short, it's a Norwegian archipelago that's located in the Arctic Ocean. And 60% of it is covered with glaciers. It also has mountains and fjords, and it has Arctic climate. Svalbard is part of the Kingdom of Norway since 1925, but it is not part of the geographical Norway. Administratively, the archipelago is not part of Norwegian country, but forms an unincorporated area. This means that it is administrated directly by the Norwegian government through an appointment governor. Now, today's mystery is going to bring us to a particular house in Svalbard that is called Svenskhuset. In translation, it would mean the Swedish house. And this is a wooden house that is located in Cape Tortsen in Isfjorden on Svalbard, as I mentioned. And the fact is that this is the oldest building on Svalbard. This house was built in 1872 as an initiative from a man called Adolf Erik. Oh, wait a minute. It's a Swedish surname. Nordenskjöld. I'm sorry, I'm gonna write it there because obviously I'm gonna get some backlash from Swedish people down there in the comments. Sorry for that. So this guy wanted to build a house there because he wanted to extract some minerals from this area that were discovered there in the expedition that was made in 1864. So he created this house as a safe place for anyone working in that area because the conditions and climate is harsh, so that they have a place to sleep that is warm and where they can rest and have some food. This project really didn't take off, but still the house is there. But this is not the fact why we are actually here discussing this house. There is a tragic mystery surrounding the house, and now we're gonna dive in. It was autumn 1872 and a group of Norwegian seal hunters were in the area hunting for seals. So during the 19th century, seal hunting was a huge thing. They were doing it in massive amounts, and the main target was the seal blubber, which is like the fat. And it is estimated that because of those mass killings during that time, many seal species have now become extinct. Nature conditions in Arctic, as we all know, are unpredictable, and these seal hunters got stuck in the ice in the northern part of the Svalbard. They would have died, but they got some help. The crew was rescued by the men who were on expedition in that Svalbard area, and this expedition was led by a Finnish-Swedish explorer that I already mentioned, and I couldn't pronounce his surname. This Adolf Erik, and this is his surname. Now, the expedition guys, of course, were living in a proper accommodation nearby where this accident happened, but the problem was that the capacity for accommodation was limited. They couldn't pick up and save all of the hunters that were stuck in the ice. So they had to decide what to do, because part of the guys, they couldn't save them. They couldn't provide them with bed and food and stuff. And this is when they remembered that they also have Svenskhuset on Svalbard. And this house has enough coal to keep the house heat, has enough food. So they now knew that that part that cannot follow them on their accommodation can go to Svenskhuset. The only problem was that this Svenskhuset was actually quite far away from the place where this accident took place and where the expedition was living. The guys who would be picked up to go to Svenskhuset to keep themselves safe would have to go there by themselves and do that in a rowboat. Yes, you heard me correctly, in Arctic climate, in the Arctic Ocean by rowboat. What they did was they picked up 17 guys who didn't have families, and I assume they were a lot younger and stronger, and those guys were about to go to the Svenskhuset, to do this long way to Svenskhuset. And the rest of the guys, I assume they were older, they had families, so these guys went together with the expedition guys to the closest accommodation. The journey for these 17 men was actually quite harsh. They had to row as far as 350 kilometers away from the place where this accident happened. 350 kilometers is around 220 miles. And they were like rowing for 7 days until they reached the Svenskhuset. Well, before you judge, this was the only way how to save all of the men. And in this way, all of the men could have a safe accommodation with food, with warmth, and they could patiently wait for somebody to save them and bring them back home to Norway. But things went completely differently at this moment. A couple of months passed and a rescue expedition was sent from Norway. It was led by a man named Fritz Mack, and they were sent there to Svalbard to pick up all of the hunter guys and bring them back home safely. When they arrived at the place where the Svenskhuset was, the view that they saw was simply tragic and horrible. Outside the house, they found at least 5 bodies that were covered in trampoline and they were already dead. When they approached the house, the door was locked from the inside and there was a sign that was warning not to enter. When they went into the house, they saw this horrific view. There were dead bodies all over the house, on the chairs, on the beds, on the floor, everywhere. Altogether, they found 15 dead bodies in the Svenskhuset and its area. And as you remember, there were 17 men sent to Svenskhuset. The rest 2 bodies were found only a couple of years later by some other researchers who went there. One of the seal hunters, his name was Karl Albertsen. He apparently kept a diary while he was living there, so he wrote down things that were happening around them. He wrote down that the first man who had died, his name was Hans Hansen, and he died already in November. And by Christmas, all of the men that were living in the house were already sick. The last diary entry was written on April the 19th, and it is assumed that Albertsen actually was the last man who was alive. Like, he saw all of his friends, his mates die, and he was the last one. What happened there? What kind of illness are we looking into? Was it something out of this world, or was it something that we can explain? Well, let's look into that. What did he mean by saying sick? Was that some kind of virus? Was it something that might endanger other people coming into the house? I mean, there was indeed a sign warning not to enter. Historically, we know that there are numerous mysterious disappearances and deaths in weird circumstances that have occurred in wild nature, and Arctic is no exception. One of the most discussed are the ones in US national parks, and also, for example, the Dyatlov Passage mystery. Could this be one of that kind? When they started to research this tragic scene, they immediately excluded the possibility that these men died from starvation, since the house had still enough food and enough fuel to keep them warm. It was long believed that the men had died from scurvy, an ailment caused by lack of vitamin C and common in polar regions. The men were considered to be careless and ignorant, which later caused them to die there. However, some of the historical evidence do not speak in favor of scurvy being the reason why all of them died. Firstly, more or less it seems that all of the men got sick in the same time, which would not be the case of scurvy. And secondly, which is very important, the entries in the diary written down by this man I already mentioned clearly indicated that these guys, they were aware of the dangers of scurvy and they knew how to avoid it and how to behave in these conditions to not to get sick with that illness. Furthermore, among the possibilities that might have killed these guys, they also push forward the ideas of botulism and also tuberculosis. Now, of course, we can speculate as much as we want, but we cannot get any answers without really examining the bodies of the deceased. And so only in the year 2007, which is quite recent if we compare to the year when it happened, it was 1872 when they went to Svenskhuset. So in 2007, Dr. Ulf Asebo and historian Kjell Kjær applied for the permission to open the graves of the deceased and really start to research them to find the answers. These scientists were determined to establish the real cause of deaths that took place there by analyzing and researching the bodies of the deceased. And his idea already before doing this research was that these hunters might have died from lead poisoning rather than from scurvy. And there was actually a reason behind this idea and this suggestion that this might be a lead poisoning. You see, during the 19th century, the sealant of tin cans actually consisted 50% from lead. At first, the application by the scientists was denied by the Norwegian Directorate for Cultural Heritage. But after further elaboration of the scientific purpose and method of the study, permission was granted in July 2008. The researchers stayed in Cape Thorsen from 7th up to 9th August. Some of the graves contain bodies still in their beds, frozen into blocks of ice. Now the weirdest part. So according to the researchers, some of the bodies were so well preserved that they even felt it's unethical to cut them apart and take samples from them. They said that they didn't look like skeletons, like remains of bodies, but like real people just frozen in ice. That's a tricky thing, from one side there is ethics and from the other side, you're the researcher and you came there to get some answers. It was good that they found also other bodies that were not, let's say, so well preserved and didn't look so alive. So they took those samples from the bodies that were more like remains of bodies and skeletons. The samples confirmed what they were suspicious of. The skeleton showed extremely high concentrations of lead, and also they tested the tin cans that were in the house, and it showed the same, there was a high concentration of lead in those cans. This discovery finally, so many years passed, but finally now they knew the real reason of the deaths of 17 men who were living in Svenskhuset waiting for their saviors after this accident that happened during the hunt. What a tragedy. Remember, they went there for 350 kilometers in the cold, in harsh conditions, and they felt like that would be their safe place, that they would just hang around there, eat some food, keep themselves warm, and then get back home. But they ended up like this, looking at each other, literally dying and suffering. Terrible death. At this point, I feel like this is the worst death ever, when you feel you're saved, but you're not. And I don't want to be cruel here, but if you die in Svalbard, at least you can imagine dying from attack of a polar bear, or I don't know, for God's sake, freezing because it's too cold, or there is a storm or something. But dying like this from tin cans, it's terrible. It's terrible. Nowadays, this Svenskhuset is part of Isfjorden National Park and is protected as cultural heritage. And people who know the story, they know, and now you also know because I told you this story. So this is it for me today. Let me know what you think about this story. Oh, and yeah, write down if you would be up to visit Svalbard anytime. I know it's quite complicated because it's not like even like Schengen territory and you need to do all of the paperwork to get there, but I don't know how many clothes would I wear to go there because I'm always freezing, but it would be very tempting to actually go there. Anyways, I hope you have a lovely day. I hope you will be waiting for my next video. That being said, I'm taking a week's break. I'm going back to home to Latvia for a week, so I'm not sure if I'm gonna make another video. If I manage, there's gonna be. If not, just be aware that there might be a week's break. Don't worry. I will be back, of course, with some nice stories for you. They're not like nice, but they're a little bit creepy and mysterious and yeah. Well, you know. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. See you next time. Also wanted to say that I opened myself a Patreon, so if you would be happy to support me, I would be very happy. I'm not asking for money. I actually feel very, very awkward doing that, but if you feel like you would love to appreciate my work, there's a link in the description, but it's up to you. Also, I'm offering a subscription for those who would love to see my videos first before they go out on YouTube. That being said, here's the link. Support me. Of course, if you want, no pressure.